they've also been quite forward-leaning without actually acknowledging they are forward-leaning about it.
The options are essentially stop providing services or do it for free.
The economy is a system that was designed. We can redesign it to get the outcomes we want to see.
Actually, this wasn't inevitable. You had a choice about what you gave your money to, and you chose to keep your promise to landlord.
It is quite devastating to see this current government absolutely trash what has been a really good track record with disability.
The complete lack of investment into Te Ao Māori.
What is the top priority for that $15 billion? The government says the top priority for that $15 billion is tax cuts.
But it's not fair that a religious group like Destiny Church stands outside a school. If it was any other protest group, parents would not accept that.
Hey, no, wait, that's somebody else who says that. I probably shouldn't steal his thing. I'll just stick with hello there and kia ora. It's much easier. Good evening, Blake. How are you?
I am fine. Been a long day. Organising things for the future.
Yes, it has. I've been up since 6 o'clock in the morning. It's been exhausting. And hello to everybody in the chat and everybody watching at home. We are waiting for Francisco to get here because MPs are busy people, but shouldn't be too far away, hopefully. But in the meantime, while we wait, Blake, would you like to tell everybody a bit about the project that's been keeping you busy today?
We're going. Well, I've and Paul will join some episodes. We've got a new show coming, and it's called Disability Sector: The Truth. And we filmed the first episode today. It was with advocate Hana Hiki, and here's a few clips from that show.
Absolutely.
All the parties, all the politicians, and what do they do for disabled? Every single one of them managed to get in euthanasia, which is a high risk. We've got a bill coming up shortly, and our favourite eugenicist sitting in Parliament is happy to extend it to disabled. And I bet you not one political party will stand against it because they all have their issues against us.
I'm wondering if people can guess who everybody's favourite eugenicist is. I'm sure they can. And then there's this clip as well.
Or what, the era left.
Well, this is the crazy part. It was under John Key that the pilot began. It continued under Labor. They weren't going to stop it. It was costing the state a lot of money every year. And every year, NAS services had to sacrifice millions of dollars to keep this Enabling Good Lives pilot going. And so we knew then that there was a funding issue. Not one party has looked at how to fund all of this. Now, we've offered suggestions. There's economists like Ganesh Nana, who's a brilliant social economist.
I can't remember the rest of that, but people can check it out when I've got it all edited up. We want to get a couple of episodes in the can beforehand so that we've got a bit of a leeway running into things, and it will be all go from there. I'm kind of curious, though, why did you feel it was important to do something like this, Blake?
Because mainly there's a lot of it I can't talk. I've posted it, so maybe I can post some of it. But there were political reasons why I was asked to do this show. If you follow me on social media, I teased why a little bit, because politicians have reached out to me and said they can't just use letters as evidence. They need people to speak out because they can't take letters verbatim, basically. So yeah, that's one of the reasons. And the other reason is to put pressure on national MPs like Shane Ritty and Louise Upton to come on programs like these, because it's really important. And some of you may disagree, and that's okay, for the opinions to be out there as well. because as the old saying goes, there's two sides to every story. And yeah.
I think it'll be really interesting to see the point of view of a whole bunch of people working in the industry and advocating for different groups as well within the sector. So I'm actually really looking forward to having a chance to sit down and edit it and cut out the things I shouldn't cut out, but or cut out the things that I should cut out and make sure that everybody is looked after and everyone's perspective comes across. So the first episode's already in the can. We recorded that this morning, and we've got another couple of guests already lined up, I believe. I mean, you know more about the guest lineup than I do on this one. So
yeah. One of them, you would have seen her on BHN. So if any of you regular BHN watchers will know who she is. And then over the summer, we'll be filming another one. So for anyone interested in behind the scenes stuff, it'll be filmed from now through till the end of March with a break for Christmas, and then we'll come back and shoot a whole bunch in the middle of January through to March. And we're hoping that by the end of the series, Minister Upton will agree to appear.
I still have my doubts that she will, but I like to be proven wrong on these things. So fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. I have just received a message from our guest tonight. He is running a little bit late because his EAs forgot to put the link in his diary.
Let's see.
Yeah. So he shouldn't be too far away. He's seen the message, so that's a good sign. He's seen the link, so he shouldn't be too far away. Oh, speak of the devil. Now, last week, you might have remembered I had a little trouble with the noise, but that's not going to happen this week. Let's jump. Mabuhay, Francisco.
Mabuhay. Thank you, and sorry for the delay.
It's fine. These things happen. You're a very busy person, from what I understand. The one thing everyone tells me is that you are non-stop as an MP, so you must have hit the ground running, as it were.
Yeah, well, I've worked in Parliament before, so that gives me a pretty good advantage, kind of knowing how the place works and the institutions around it. So, yeah, thank you.
How are you finding it all so far?
I think it's it's always an interesting experience, kind of peeking behind that kind of theater of how it works and really knowing how the sausage is made. But yeah, it's good so far. It's been it's a real privilege to be able to, rather than kind of futilely screaming at the government from the outside, kind of futilely screaming at them from the inside, the halls of Parliament. So yeah, it's a real privilege to be there. And
yeah.
You go, Blake. I'm sure you got a question there.
So how's the first? So firstly, hi. How's the first couple of months been for you?
The first couple of months has been this is my I think 5th month now in Parliament. Yeah, I'm approaching 5 days, 5 months now, and of course we've got a new MP getting sworn in on I think next week, so I won't be the freshest member of caucus. But yeah, it was like a whirlwind experience, kind of going through and getting in to be an MP in such a turbulent time, but also having such busy portfolios as well with all the stuff that's going on with the public sector layoffs and also the reforms to Tipukenga. So it's been really busy, really interesting, but yeah, nice to connect with communities and nice to do my best to try and hold the government to account.
In terms of the portfolios that you've got, you've mentioned two that are sort of really big news because of all the cuts that are coming to them and slashes that are being taken to them by the current government. Did you choose to take those portfolios because of your areas of expertise and your background, or was it more a case of, what would you like to learn more about? How did that process work for you, and what's been sort of your biggest discovery in those portfolios?
Yeah, well, how it works is that you kind of, the Greens allocate portfolios, and you kind of ask for portfolios you want, and I asked for portfolios that I knew would align with my skill sets and background, because I've got a long history of working in the public service, and also my previous experience as a student union president as well, thought would stand me in good stead. I think the biggest thing I've learned so far is like how little the government is actually guided by evidence. I mean, you would have seen this week with all the stuff around Mike King and his comments around, alcohol, how little they're actually guided. I mean, they gave this guy who does do some good work in some areas, but if he, you need to give everyone a fair go and give everyone a chance to participate in a process, not just kind of giving it in a process which has been criticized by the Auditor General. And the other aspect as well is the working from home announcement. I mean, we've found out through parliamentary written questions that the government commissioned no advice or no evidence behind it. They just made the announcement and then started getting evidence. So yeah, it's been really concerning seeing how little the government is actually relying on actual evidence-based decision-making, and how they're kind of relying on vibes and reckons that they probably hear from people at the core lounge, to be honest.
That's horrifying. That's genuinely horrifying.
It's really
as somebody
it's very
in the public service, I am kind of curious, as someone who's worked in the public service, have you had feedback from people there about these cuts and the scythe that Nicola Willis has been taking to work each day?
Yeah, well, look, there's like a lot of concerns I'm hearing from people underground about the kind of impacts to mental well-being that people are having, but I'm also hearing from people at the front lines. I've got friends. I went to Otago Uni, so a lot of the people that I went through uni with ended up becoming doctors, and they're telling me about the pressure, the immense pressure they're in because of the hiring freeze that's happening at the front line, and also because of the fact that they've frozen so much, because of the fact that they've sacked so many public servants who were doing admin work. Now these doctors and nurses are having to do admin work, and it's really taking away from patient contact time, and in some cases even leading to like delays in discharging, which has absolute implications on like how quickly people are being seen. So yeah, very concerning hearing from people underground.
We were told that there'd be no cuts to frontline services. Nothing would impact frontline services. Are you telling me that the government lied to us?
Oh, well, it's actually like, yeah. I think you're not allowed to like accuse other politicians of lying. That's one of the rules of that you have to follow as a member of parliament. But I would say that they've been quite economical with the truth, and perhaps overly optimistic in their assumptions about, how cutting the back line wouldn't lead to impact on the front line, because the distinctions are bogus anyway, right? Like, we don't expect, soldiers fighting in the war to like then be like, making their own ammunition, and we don't expect people at the front lines to be like doing their own battles. It's just an absurd kind of concept.
You want to jump in there, Blake?
So you talk about the frontline services. How has it been affected in your local electorate? Because we've seen a lot of your the green electorates targeted with the hospitals and things like that. So how has it been for your local constituents that you deal with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, well, look, I'm from Dunedin, and we've already seen how the government has kind of frozen the funding for the Dunedin hospital rebuild. And while Dunedin isn't a green electorate yet, we came second in the party vote. I mean, hopefully it'll be a green one day. But they do have this pattern of like treating areas of the country that didn't vote for them with contempt. You've seen that in the way that they've treated Wellington, imposing like a observer over the like heads of the elected council, and you see it happening in Dunedin as well, with the government breaking their promise to like build the hospital that they promised, and also like denying Dunedin the sort of climate adaptation funding that it asked for, which might have made the kind of flooding events that happened just earlier last month less worse than it would have been. So yeah, it's just concerning how badly they treat people that didn't vote for them with absolute contempt.
And
What
what
did
did
they say
you?
about the people who did give the money?
Sorry. And what did what the doctors that you've spoken to say to you? What have they said to you that they're mostly concerned about moving forward?
Well, the main concern has been that the sort of hiring freeze, right? Like, because this government has created like a fake fiscal crisis in Health New Zealand, it's meant that because they've imposed the baseline savings targets, it's meant that that the doctors and that a lot of the hospital management can't hire the sort of doctors and nurses and other medical professionals they need. And it's absolutely leading to like a lot of pressure in the health sector, and it's leading to quite unsafe clinical outcomes. People, the doctors and the nurses that I've spoken to are really concerned.
And have you and all the other Dunedin-based MPs had a chance to speak to Mr. Levy about the issues you're worried about?
Oh, look, every day in the House we're, explaining our concerns to the government. We're doing that through letters, we're doing that through parliamentary written questions, but, it's like going through a bit of a brick wall, to be honest. So, but we'll still keep opposing, we'll keep building the public pressure, because we have seen that if there's enough public momentum that rallies behind the government, that they do sometimes back down on some aspects of their policy. We saw that with a fast track legislation where they watered it a little bit down. Instead of like having the ministers handpicking which projects it would do, they've referred to a so-called expert panel, which they're picking anyway. So, how much of an expert panel it is up for debate, but it's still better than the ministers picking directly. And we know that, when 1/3 of the city of Dunedin like rallies against the government, that's a big concern to them. And it's not just the people in Dunedin. The people in the other heartland seats are rallying as well. The mayor of Balclutha was at the Dunedin rally, and a lot of people are concerned about the health services that they're getting. And look, it's not just Dunedin which needs a hospital. I mean, I was just in Whangārei, where I met with people in across the city, and they're really concerned that they need like the hospital that National promised them they'd get to be actually built, because what I'm hearing from people on the ground is that the Whangārei hospital seems to be like quite unsafe from what people are saying.
Our next guest is actually a doctor at the Whangārei hospital.
Oh wow!
You're more than welcome to stick around and have a chat to him as well when he arrives. If you want to get word on the ground from within the walls, see what it's like there. Let's have a little chat about Te Pukenga and the splitting up of something that was sort of halfway through being put together. That whole process of amalgamating our polytechnic networks. Have you seen any feedback on how that's going? What the feeling is inside those organizations?
Yeah, look, it's a mixture of, I think the predominant feeling from people, whether they oppose the reform or support the reform, is exhaustion. The government has been, the sector has absolutely been battered by like 5 years of change. The staff have faced uncertainty, the students have faced uncertainty, and they just want, I guess, an end to the like kind of reforms, like a settling of it one way or the other, because we can't keep going back to like re-merging and demerging. That would be a disastrous outcome, whichever side of the debate is on. And that's what people want most of all. And I think this is the like kind of concerning aspect to me, right? Like essentially the model that the government's preferred option is that the polytechs that can stand alone. That's fine. But the polytechs that can't stand alone will be in what's called the Federation, which mostly being helmed by Open Polytech. So it just seems to me they've reinvented Te Pukenga, except they've kind of removed the sort of ability for the sort of weaker, less viable institutions to benefit from the presence of the stronger ones. So it just seems to me that the cumulative effect of the reforms would be to weaken the polytech sector. And, like this is absolutely going to undermine public education and just strengthen the like PTEs and for-profit tertiary institutions.
I personally, as a massive nerd, have no issue with the Federation. You know, it's I like the name. The name works, but it sounds a little borgy in that resistance seems to be kind of futile. I understand that there was a bit of an issue as well around funding, in that some of the numbers that Penny Simmons was using was completely inflated, essentially, in terms of the money that was owing to that incurred during the process of the setup. Is there a lot of misinformation out there around the process and what was involved, what is involved?
Well, I wish, well, I don't wish, but there's been a lack of like transparency from the minister about what the numbers actually mean, and in the absence of the government actually releasing actual numbers. You know, when we OIA them, sometimes there's just big sheets that come back with redactions, and you can't really make evidence-based decision making on the basis of that. You can't have an informed public debate on the basis of that. So it makes it hard to like actually tell what's what. So I'm not surprised that there's information floating around, because the government has like left a vacuum. And you know, I don't know if they're doing that because they want there to be some confusion, and they want to be able to like blitzkrieg it when the time comes to make these reforms, so that people can't stand against it, or whether they've actually not done the numbers themselves. I'm not sure, but either way, it's alarming.
Sorry, I've enjoyed listening. So, do you think there need to be more schools opening then, or do we have enough? Like more more polytechs and more unis and all that kind of stuff, or do we have enough that for the current quota, and you're satisfied?
Well, look, I think fundamentally we as a society need to like review, like rethink the way that we think about public services and education, right? They're not people, there's an expectation, and there's some of the rhetoric coming from the government that like Health New Zealand is like coming under deficits, that the polytechs are under deficits, but the point of public services isn't to make money. The point of public services is to like serve a public good. It's to like educate people. It's to look after people's health. It's not to make a profit. So the question of whether there's enough, polytechs and whether there's enough hospitals, it's fundamentally a question about accessibility, right? If there's people in the regions or places in New Zealand that are being underserved because they can't get access to the things they need, whether that's education or whether that's health services, then yes, there does need to be more of it. And it needs to be paid for through like a wealth tax, so that we can actually invest in the things that people need. So, it's a bit of a, the question is, are people getting access to the things they need? And I would answer no. There's like a lot of underserved need, particularly in rural communities, particularly in Maori communities, and we can't stop until everyone who needs access to a doctor gets one, and everyone who wants to study but gets to be able to study.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good segue for me to bring in Dr. Gary Payinda, who's sitting in the green room at the moment.
Okay.
So I won't even do the fancy graphic this time, even though it's all lined up. Good evening, Dr. Gary. How are you?
Hi, Paul. Hi, Blake. Hi, Francisco. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Have you had a chance to meet Francisco yet, Gary?
Never. I've seen him online, but never in the living version of Francisco.
So he's been in your neck of the woods this week.
Yeah, I was just in Whangārei this morning.
Nice.
Yeah. Sorry.
So he was doing a bit of a tour and sort of seeing what the front line's been like for public service cuts and how they've impacted people in different parts of the region. You're in one of the regions that's been hit really hard by those. I thought really good segue just to have a conversation between the two of you as well, to see what we can do better and what the big issues are that are facing us.
We use that term "we" loosely, Paul. I think "we" does a lot of heavy lifting. I mean, it would be easier for us to just do our job. Really, that's all doctors and nurses want to do. But it's almost like we're running in sand. And yeah, I mean, they tell us that they're going to take away another $1.4 billion from the Health New Zealand budget. And yeah, I just don't know how you would manage Health New Zealand with $1.4 billion less. You know, we've had they've pushed for redundancies of 400 healthcare workers. We are now feeling that. So they love saying it's not frontline services. It won't affect clinical care. I mean, Dr. Retty and Dr. Levy, even Christopher Luxon will say things like it won't affect patients. But of course it's affecting patients. Of course it is. When you don't have clerks to register patients, when they tell you, the union just broke the news to us that Northland used to have 2 telephonists. I'll just give you a very concrete example. So I think it's illustrative of a problem that's nationwide. You have 2 telephonists for all the Northland hospitals, Dargaville, Kaitaia, Bay of Islands, and Whangārei. And you get rid of one of those positions, and there's only 1 telephonist. And when she goes on break, they're going to literally have to find a person to cover the telephonist to place emergency phone calls. So, when a mass casualty comes in or someone needing a blood transfusion gets radioed in from the ambulance call, they're going to have to ask someone like a healthcare assistant, I mean, as frontline a healthcare worker as you can get, to take the time and ring around to 12 people, or to take the time and put out an emergency call. So, I mean, the news is trickling out little by little, but we know that these cuts are having a devastating impact on frontline services. So, yeah, we just want to be able to do our job and get on with it and see people in less than a 4 or an 8-hour wait, and get them up to a ward that is able to take them because it has enough nurses. But instead, we're hearing that when nurses are leaving, they're not filling the positions. They're not allowing the nurse managers to advertise to fill those positions. Yeah, it's bad. It's really bad. And it takes its toll on staff. So we heard that there were people so worried by this break in the telephonist service that they weren't taking breaks anymore, so that they wouldn't open up that liability to patients, that risk. But how long can you go on not taking a break on a night shift, night after night? Other secretaries are telling us that they've worked 12 out of 13 consecutive shifts. That's not safe. That's not good, because they can't get coverage for sicknesses. When your colleagues are out, you come in. And of course, we're getting virtually daily texts about, can you cover this sick leave? Can you cover this absence? Can you cover this unplanned gap? Or frankly, this planned gap that we just haven't filled. And you just think, you're going to now take off 1.4 billion more? Like, what's that going to look like? We already know the elective surgical times are blowing out. ED waits are rising. You name it. Specialist appointments, I think, are at a really significant increase now. So I don't want to see it get worse. None of us do. There's a simple solution to this. It's called hiring people to fill vacancies. And this government insists on saying we're over budget, right? That's the answer. They say we have overcorrected and overhired, and we're over our staffing budget. But if you made a budget that is completely unrealistic, we heard a doctor say that they were in la la land, right? That cardiologist in Tauranga that's quitting because he's so understaffed in his department and he's just worked too much. They are in la la land, and they keep this pretense up. And at some point, I'm just waiting for them to sort of stop gaslighting and just tell the truth. We're really understaffed, nowhere near enough nurses, and let's go from there. Like, if they were at least honest about that, I could respect them for that, and then we can move forward and say, okay, what can we do about that? But if they're telling us we're overstaffed and we have too much money, it's just a slap in the face to every clinician in the country and patient. at this
And
point.
I think that's one of the kind of fundamental problems with this government that you've absolutely hit on, is that they don't own the consequences of the decisions they're making, right? Like, and a classic example of that was the story earlier this year with the woman who was giving birth in the hospital in Wellington, and how she couldn't even get a piece of toast after she'd given birth. And then, like, after that story broke, the government was like in damage control and was saying, oh, we never like intended it to be cut like that. But when you set like a baseline savings target, which is arbitrary, and you expect people to like meet $1.5 billion worth of cuts, like that pressure is going to show somewhere, whether it's, as you've said, telephonists not being able to get a break from working all evening, or in patients not being able to get the food that they needed just after they've given birth.
And as part of it all, they'll always say that we're making backroom cuts that don't affect frontline services, and there's a whole bunch of backroom waste. But when the journalists ask them to show what that waste is, show me the wasteful person in this hospital, show me the list of, itemize it. If you say there's all these billions in waste, actually show it. And they never do that. So what they've done instead is they told all the departments to shave off around 6.5%. And so you get really dangerous cuts when you do something that blunt. That's a very immature way of going about improving a service, by blindly cutting 6.5% from every department. That's not targeted. That's not about waste. It's just a horrible business decision. They hold themselves out to be holier than thou, right? They say they're very good businessmen with a great business acumen. And I mean, clearly they don't have the data, they don't have evidence, they don't have proof. They talked about 14 layers of management between the patient and the upper echelon. And it sounded great. And I mean, a soundbite like that travels around the country in no time. It's picked up everywhere. And only days later did people start saying, that sounds I don't know if that's right. Are there really 14 layers? And sure enough, Shane had to say, oh, no, I don't actually have that document. I don't have I can't give you the 14 layers. And so they produced a kind of bogus one, counting the patient as a layer, counting like the nurses and stuff as layers. It's farcical. And if the media just ask them to show evidence to back up what they're saying, it would fall apart in seconds.
While you're both still here, I'll ask the question to the both of you. So we saw the Prime Minister announce earlier this week that they're adding doctors from certain countries to the green list. Do you think this will help with the problem? And if not, why not?
I'm sorry, I don't think my connection up here is super great. They're adding who to the green list, or what to the green list?
Certain countries for doctors.
Yeah,
yes.
certain countries.
Thank you. Got it. Good question.
I believe that all of the countries that they're adding to the green list have a lot less melanin in their skin than other countries. There seems to be
I've
really
seen comments of like,
on,
what is special about the UK and Australia, et cetera. Yeah, I guess I would always be happy if we can get good doctors from competent training programs to come and serve needed roles here, especially rural and remote ones and underserved areas like Northland. But it begs the question of why we need to be importing more and more doctors and not retaining the ones we have. Why are we hemorrhaging nurses and doctors? Why are they leaving for better working conditions, safer working conditions, and better pay in Australia? Why are we just bleeding so many educated professionals? It's not a long-term sustainable solution. It's kind of like the nursing shortage. why don't we just train our own nurses? In the amount of time we've been talking about this, we could have had a whole cadre of nurses a third of the way or halfway through their training program. It's just wild. The reality is there's no political motivation to do it. What do we need to do? We need to provide living stipends for these students to be able to survive while they're in training. And then we need to create conditions where they would want to keep doing this job. It's not rocket science. We can do all of this. It's political willpower. We have decided that $2.9 billion for landlord tax breaks is far more important than training our own nurses, our own doctors, and retaining our professionals here. And so you can import, Blake, as many as you want. You can set up a shuttle bus full of them, constantly. But if you're not retaining people, it's not a long-term solution. And we have to ask ourselves, why are we not doing that? Why are we making bad political decisions? So obviously they should get the money back that they've given these landlords. I was just reading something some economists put together about rereading it just so I'd have the numbers handy. 346 mega landlords are thought to be able to make on average $1.3 million apiece with these tax cuts. That's insane. These are the folks who own greater than 200 properties. Why on earth did this political party or this coalition of parties set aside that amount of money to help people who have 200 investment properties? Do they need help? And you could even argue maybe they do need help, but it sure as hell would come after all the patients that are on waiting lists, right? It's awful.
Yeah.
It's awful.
And look, I think that's a really good point. Like you can put on shuttle buses, but if you can't hire the people that you're bringing into the country because of the hiring freeze anyway, like what's the point? Like you're just setting up like false advertising. And that's actually like an issue that like a lot of Filipino nurses who've come to this country are facing, is that they've been told to come here, they've been asked to come here, but when they come here, they find that there's no jobs at the end of the tunnel because of the hiring freeze. So I think it's just unfair that they're setting up this expectation that it's going to help somehow. It's really tinkering around the edges of what we actually need to do, and that's to like actually invest in the public health system. And look, you mentioned the billions of dollars of tax cuts for landlords, but there's also the hundreds of millions of tax cuts for the tobacco companies for their heated tobacco products, from their coalition governments like lobbying them. They're governing in the interests of the people.
216 million for Philip Morris, up to 216 million for a company that causes health damage. Like it's insane.
It's absurd.
Any questions from you, Paul? Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, is there an approach then that you, Francisco, would like to see change towards these public sector cuts? Like, is it likely that we're going to see an attitude shift in the next 2 years? And if so, how do we make that happen? What's that attitude shift? What should that be? What does it look like?
Where's he gone?
He's
I think everyone's frozen on me.
Yeah.
There he is. He's back.
Am I back?
Back.
Oh, you're back now. Brilliant.
I think things are going to sadly get worse over the next 2 years. Like rather than an attitude shift, the government's taking in, because this is something that kind of went a little bit unnoticed because it's quite obscure. But a couple of months ago, Nicola Willis issued what's called the updated government workforce policy statement. And that's basically a document that governs how the public service is meant to be going about their workforce, hiring and firing. And what she said in that is that basically pay increases in like staff conditions and all that are expected to be met with baseline funding. That means that the public service is already under pressure, but they're going to load even more pressure on, because now Health New Zealand is going to have to choose and other public sector agencies are going to have to choose between paying their staff what they're worth and just to keep up with inflation, with like things like more hospital beds, better patient care. The government is like putting these things up against each other because of that government workforce policy statement. So I think there will be an attitude change in New Zealand because people realize that they've been duped, that the sort of public sector cuts isn't actually like affecting some, latte sipping Wellington principal policy analyst. And even if it were, like, I think the jobs that they're doing is also vital and important, but it's actually affecting everyone, and it's really going to negatively impact what most people see as the sort of Kiwi dream of having good public services that look after you when you're sick or that can educate you and your children.
Very sad. Very, very sad. It's not good, is it? Yeah.
It's tragic.
No, I don't want to get sick anytime soon. It doesn't sound like a good thing to be doing. Not a good thing at all. In terms of the sort of pressures that you guys are both seeing, Gary, with you at the front line with the health services, when you go out and you talk to people out there in the public service, is there a common bit of feedback that you're getting from people? Is there this is who we blame, this is how we handle the stress? What sort of feedback are you guys seeing come through from the public?
Well, I'm in a reliably national voting area, right? Like I think all but 2 terms out of the last 40 years have gone to national. But even here, there's a recognition that that it's not working out the way people wanted it to. If you even look among builders, tradies, things are bleak right now, and they understand that all of these job losses we're seeing are only going to make things bleaker. When you have public sector austerity, it trickles out into the community. So I'll give you just a simple example. There's 140 nurses, and I keep getting emails from this group, 140 nurse practitioners who have 1 more year of training. They've done already several years. They're already fully qualified nurses, have done additional training, and half of them would go out into the rural sector. And I think 20 to 30% are intending to work in Māori communities. These are like desperately needed workers, right? And a nurse practitioner will be out there really seeing a lot of patients and taking care of a lot of people. And the funding for them is frozen. So these people are they've now, I think, been waiting about 3 months, if I understand correctly. And they have to go on with their lives. They have to take jobs. They have mortgages to pay. They have to get on with things. So obviously some of them will take other jobs, go back to nursing, or leave for Australia. And so I think the common person out there realizes, they hear these stories from the healthcare practitioners, and they realize that this is not what they signed up for. If you voted for national, this is not what you planned for. You didn't want it to look this way. You don't want $216 million going to Philip Morris. It's common sense. And yeah, so I think the people I talk to are disappointed. They may not be willing to blame individuals, but they know that this isn't what they bargained for, and they're sad about it. And I'm with them. I agree.
Yeah, look, I think that there's definitely like that sentiment. There's a lot of buyer's regret out there, and I think it's because people didn't really vote for this coalition, right? They kind of, some people did, but a lot of the swing voters who make or break governments kind of voted against Labour just because they were feeling the pinch of the inflation. They weren't necessarily thinking, oh well, Nicola Willis is gonna like give all these tax breaks to landlords. They weren't thinking that way. They were just saying, oh well, things were getting tough like last year. Well, yeah, in the election last year, like there was that big inflation squeeze. There was the like oil prices exploding, and to some extent, this coalition like just benefited from that. And yeah, there is a lot of buyer's regret. But the second thing that I'm seeing is that the people who I've been talking to, whether they're in the health frontline or education frontline, know that there's sort of gaps, but they're filling it anyway. They're that community minded. So even though this government is doing a lot of terrible things, it's inspiring seeing people at the front line kind of do their best against the circumstances, and they shouldn't need to like sacrifice themselves. But a lot of them are doing it, and that's in a way beautiful to see. Also, kind of sad that people are like stretching themselves to breaking point just to cover the deliberate gaps that this government is like leaving.
I just hope that more journalists show the disconnect, like you're doing, between what these folks, these politicians say and what they actually do. Because you can say you're for patients all you want, but if you end up voting for tobacco and against the anti-smoking laws, in my book, it's hard to say you're really a doctor anymore or a health minister. So they've got to judge people by their actions and not their words. And I mean, we have another 2 years for folks to realize this and see what's happening. And I don't think there's any sign that it'll get better in those 2 years. Unfortunately,
I've got one last question for you, and it's a little bit more of a oddly specific one. Dr. Shane Reti holds shares in Whangārei Health, which I believe is a private medical care facility up there. Do you think that kind of conflict makes it harder for him to be able to make the calls that he's made around funding for the hospital, for example, funding for services in the area? Does that cause a conflict of interest, or is there something there that basically steps him away so he's making bad decisions for everyone?
Okay, well, to be fair, he would say that most GPs have a private business and are sort of private business people. But obviously he has more holdings than just that one and more business interests than just that one. I think his conflicts are small potatoes compared to Lester Levy's. That man had a hand in every private profit-driven medical business out there. I mean, literally like 24 or more big companies. I think he was the founder of Ascot Hospital, which is now Mercy Ascot, huge private hospital. He, and about 20 other health businesses. He sort of divested himself or stepped away. I read an article about this recently. He said, just before he started or a little bit after, he got rid of all of these. Because, I mean, it's a bad look, right? To be the guy in charge of the health of the public healthcare sector and being the guy that profits from when the public healthcare sector falls apart and people have to go privately. Like, yeah, there's a huge conflict. So he tried to divest himself of most of them. I think he still has some. Cyclotron New Zealand, and which I think is probably a nuclear medicine thing, but I don't really know because we haven't had good investigative journalists who have pursued it. But it seems I just don't understand politics or how it works that you can even have these conflicts. Apparently, you can have horrendous conflicts, and all you have to do is declare them on a list and say, if it's directly involved, I'll step out. But of course, to me, that's just insane. Like, I think if you're going to be in politics, get rid of your private profit holdings, your private health businesses. If you're going to run public health, don't have any private health businesses. It doesn't make sense to me. But there's a lot of hypocrisy that I find galling, that I think a lot of normal people would be outraged by. If you spend a second and ask yourself why Philip Morris got up to $216 million for heated tobacco products. I think they're the only tobacco company that is going to be able to claim that money. At the same time, Christopher Luxon's sister-in-law is an executive in Philip Morris. This is what I understand from public newspapers. 2 of the people that led Winston Peters' campaign now work for Philip Morris. One of the ministers is ex-tobacco lobbyists. In fact, I think it's actually 2 of them might have been workers for Philip Morris. This is insane stuff. It's not normal. in my opinion. And I can't believe we're in the situation where we're even talking about this. Like, how many personal, family, and professional links do our politicians have to like one of the biggest tobacco multinational corporations in the world, who is getting up to 216 million for their special tobacco product that'll go out and harm more New Zealanders, with a health minister that have voted against limiting nicotine in cigarettes? It's just, and voted against the smoke-free regulations. I mean, it just gets worse and worse and worse. So, yeah, can I call it corruption? I think that's going to be for the journalists to decide, and the public to decide, and the courts to decide, but it sure smells like it.
This is the most like conflicted government that's ever come into existence. I mean, it's quite absurd, like that they've put a gun lobbyist in charge of the gun legislation, and that they've put like people who are like tobacco lobbyists like in charge of like tobacco legislation. They've put people with like interest in the mining sector in charge of environmental legislation. It's
unreal.
It's like to like call it corruption implies that there's something hidden in it and all of it, but it's out there. It's like public. They're not ashamed of it. They're flaunting it in our faces. So I think it's like even worse than that, really. It's just like so naked. It just boggles me sometimes, And you've got people like who, even though don't have like direct companies, you've got people like Luxon who owns like 7 properties, like making
I think he's down to 4 or 5 now, because he benefited from the change in the Bright Line laws, so that he could make $500,000 tax-free. I mean, it just gets worse and worse the deeper you look.
Right.
Shane Jones with the fast tracking. Oh, you've got friends in these companies that you're fast tracking that donated to your campaign. It boggles the mind. I don't understand how this is legal.
Yeah. Look, I think there's a comment here, and I think there needs to be something like that, but it would be up to the democracy spokesperson for the Greens to do that, because we've got little portfolio areas, but it's definitely a good idea to have like a ICAC.
Do you know who the democracy spokesperson is off the top of your head?
I think it's Celia Wade Brown.
Okay. All right, because we have Julianne coming in a couple of weeks.
Great.
We could hit her up then.
Oh, yes.
Great fun. Guys, we're out of time. Thank you so much for everything tonight. It has been absolutely brilliant, as usual, catching up with you. Francisco, one very last quick question. Are you doing anything for All Saints Day today?
I didn't even realize it was, you kind of just lose track of time.
Yeah.
Every day kind of blurs into one. Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. My partner's Filipino, and they've been telling me all about it over the last couple of days. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, like in the Philippines, we would normally go to like, the graveyards and visit our loved ones. But yeah, back home.
No worries. Thank you very much, guys. Very much appreciated.
Great.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you. Thanks for having us.
Nice meeting you, Francisco. Bye, Blake. Bye, Paul.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
See you later, guys. Thank you. Brilliant, as always, because I learn so much every time I sit down and talk to people like Gary and Francisco. It blows my mind. Now, we've got 7 minutes left, and I've got 7 minutes worth of news. So I'm just going to jump straight into it so that people aren't late for watching BHN. If you've got no objections, Blake?
Yeah, all good. Let's go.
Sweet. Hello there, kia ora, and welcome to this week's news. An historic first occurred during this year's Labour weekend. The official road toll at the end of the weekend was 0 for the first time ever. Said Transport Minister Simeon Brown, seen here wondering how long dogs live since Blue's Clues and its revivals have been on air since 1996. Yeah, sorry about that, we'll try harder next time. In Samoa, Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, seen here with some British beneficiary from a state housing project, spent time having quite normal conversations with King Charles III and trying not to laugh when CHOGM heads of state passed resolutions promising to take action on climate change. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister couldn't find time in his busy schedule of making TikToks and having fancy dinners to visit the site of the submerged Navy vessel Manoa Nui, or visit villages impacted by fuel leaks from the first Navy ship to sink in 70 years, saying, well, it's on the floor of the ocean now, really just a big dining cart for natural sea life. And as you know, We don't do bottom feeders. International fact-checking member, the Australian Associated Press, has called out Education Minister Erica Stanford, seen here showing media how to dance a hula, for making misleading claims to justify cutting a Te Reo Māori language program to reallocate funding for the government's new rushed maths curriculum based on erroneous test data. The AAP found that while Stanford was technically correct in her claims that an independent monitoring report found no evidence the course had improved outcomes for students or in the classroom, they also pointed out that the reason for this was because that was not part of the scope of the report. A spokesperson for Stanford's office backed this up, stating that the reason they could not find the data was because it wasn't there. Not that National Party voters will notice. After all, they keep saying things like National's the party of business and fiscal responsibility, and that's clearly never been accurate, as seen here when looking at data on employment, business liquidations, filled jobs, and job growth from the last 12 months. Drama in Wellington this week as new transport data shows one specific cycle lane outside Parliament had drastically slowed down traffic on the Lambton Quay to Molesworth Street leg of some bus routes, according to the Post, owned by Vision for Wellington member and totally not biased against the council in any way, Sinead Boucher. That actual data, though, shows traffic was slowed by a construction site, a broken traffic light and maintenance on Tina Cordy Road. After changes to light phasing to compensate, those travelling on buses now have to wait an extra 47 seconds, which have been added to travel time. Said Transport Minister Simeon Brown, "It's clear to me that the cycleways on Molesworth and Murphy Street are frustrating with increased congestion on this key arterial route, because that's what the Post told me to think." NZQA, the New Zealand Qualifications Authority, this week confirmed that all 8 of its permanent staff that support exam centres as part of NCEA exams had chosen to take redundancy or had resigned over the last 12 months. Those roles have been replaced by 7 staff moved from other areas and 4 temporary support staff to ensure the smooth running of exams later this year. Said Education Minister Erica Stanford, seen here wondering if anyone realises that she's the Education Minister and not David Seymour. "We want all of our students to do well in exams, and that way we can set them up the foundations for long careers ahead working in sectors like the civil service, where they can worry about being fired and asked to do jobs they're not trained in or qualified for, like organising and running NZQA exams as we make cuts to pay for landlord tax breaks." Changes to the school lunch programs announced by Associate Education Minister David Seymour, seen here trying what has been described as human food for the first time, are raising concerns around the country. The Ministry of Education has confirmed that 75 current providers will have their contracts end in December, leaving up to 2,000 people out of work, despite earlier assurances from Seymour that contracts would continue over a 2-year period, which has led to some suppliers laying complaints with the Prime Minister's office and the Ombudsman. In their place, international company Compass Group, which has had its own controversies, will be taking over, but they could see mass-produced food shipped from places like Hamilton all the way to the west coast of the South Island in the most inefficient undertaking since seeing David Seymour try human food, like a human. Information released this week under the OIA shows that Finance Minister Nicola Willis, seen here telling media to stop, collaborate and listen, ICE is backed with a brand new invention, made her recent decision to demand the re-evaluation of work from home practices for civil servants and public sector workers based on informal conversations with no evidence to back up claims around productivity or the flow-on effects for local businesses, and couldn't name a single business that supports the new directive. At the time of the announcement, Willis maintained data collection was a key step to what was really going on, but that data wasn't actually collected before the announcement, and Willis has not received any official correspondence or had any meetings on the topic before the announcement. When pressed for comment, Willis pointed out that it's written into the coalition agreements that decisions will be based on evidence and seen clearly in policies already implemented, like raising speed limits, loosening smoke-free legislation, revamping freshwater policy, their approach to punitive measures against beneficiaries and criminals, the justification for the rush on the revamped maths curriculum, and putting in an observer at Wellington City Council. The High Court released findings this week that found iwi from the top of Te Waiponamu are owed thousands of hectares of land and millions of dollars in compensation for a land deal struck in the 1830s, which the government did not honour. When asked for comment, Hobson's Pledge founder Don Brash was found in the corner screaming into his pillow. In Hamilton this week, the City Council met to discuss the future of Sovereign Citizen-aligned Lisgun-affiliated councillor Andrew Bidder, seen here realising birds aren't real, after his refusal to accept the findings and outcomes of a recent Code of Conduct complaint process, after he used ableist slurs used to denigrate disabled people. During the process, Bidder was censured and ordered to apologise specifically to organisations that work with people who live with cerebral palsy and other disabilities, and so far has refused to do so, claiming the entire process was corrupt and that he wouldn't apologise or resign if asked to, which is a move the council is considering. Unfortunately, the current law around dealing with problematic elected councillors when they need to be held to account is weaker than the evidence used to remove funding for Te Reo Māori courses by Erica Stanford to pay for maths books, or demand civil servants stop working from home to save the cafes in the CBD. And finally, Wellington icon Quasi is on the move after 5 years sitting perched above the Wellington Art Gallery. The almost 5 metre tall sculpture that is a combination of artist Ronnie van Hout's face and hand has been the subject of both praise and derision from locals, calling it kind of creepy and a Lovecraftian nightmare come to life. Quasi will be airlifted on Saturday off the building and is on its way to an undisclosed location in Australia. At the time of recording, the Post is yet to blame Mayor Tory Whānau and the left-leaning Wellington City Councillors for this event, saying there's only so much space we have to print and there's bike lanes to vilify first. And that is this week's news. Done. And it's now like 9:01. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody so we can all duck over to the new BHN show. Any last final thoughts there, Blake?
We'll be back next week with Campbellberry, Geordie Rogers, and we might go early so that we don't overrun anymore.
Yeah. All right, guys. Go and enjoy BHN. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Ka kite anō. Have a fantastic evening.
Right.